The CEO of Titan Corpors, Cameron Blake, was known for his ruthless business tactics and icy demeanor. So when the news hit, he was dead. His entire staff went into a state of shock. Employees cried, some even feared for their jobs, unsure of what would come next. But there was one person who wasn't shocked, his assistant, Emma. She knew something the others didn't, something far darker and more personal. What had really happened to Cameron Blake? Was it truly death, or something else that would change everything for those who remained? Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss the twists and turns as we unravel the mystery behind Cameron Blake's supposed death. Stay tuned for more unbelievable stories. Cameron Blake was born into wealth, the kind of wealth that made people envy, admire, and fear him. Growing up in a mansion with walls that echoed power, Cameron never lacked for anything material. His father, a self-made billionaire, handed him the reins of Titan Corp, at a young age grooming him to become one of the most influential CEOs in the world. Cameron inherited his father's ambition, but not his father's humanity. He learned early on that in his world, emotions were weaknesses. People weren't friends. They were business partners, tools to be used and discarded. His childhood was spent in boardrooms, not playgrounds, and his mentors were ruthless, demanding perfection in everything. At 30, Cameron had it all: private jets, exclusive cars, a string of luxury homes. But he felt hollow. His relationships mirrored his business deals, transactional, impersonal. He dated supermodels, attended elite galas, and threw extravagant parties. But when the camera stopped flashing, the silence was deafening. There was no one to share the quiet moments with. Cameron had never known love, not the kind that came from the heart. He was driven by success, not connection. Deep down, Cameron was aware of this emptiness, but he buried it under the weight of his achievements. His colleagues respected him, his staff feared him, and his enemies envied him. Yet every night, as he lay in the cold, empty expanse of his mansion, he asked himself the same question: is this all there is? He had everything money could buy, but somewhere along the way, Cameron lost what mattered most: human connection. Beneath the confident, ice-cold exterior, Cameron Blake was a man searching for something he didn't know how to find. And his loneliness was a secret only he could hear. Emma Matthews walked into Cameron Blake's world like a breath of fresh air, and to Cameron, she was an enigma he couldn't quite figure out. She wasn't impressed by his wealth, nor did she indulge in the sycophantic behavior that the others did. She wasn't fazed by his status, his power, or the expensive suits that screamed authority. She was hired as his new personal assistant, just another cog in the machine. But to Cameron, she quickly became something more. Unlike everyone else who saw him as a king, Emma saw him simply as a man. She didn't worship him. She didn't fear him. Her focus was on her job, and that was it. Her demeanor was calm and collected, yet there was a quiet strength to her. It wasn't long before Cameron began to notice her, really notice her. She didn't laugh at his jokes, didn't butter him up with compliments, and most frustratingly, she didn't bat an eye at the lavish gifts he offered. No amount of money or luxury could get her attention. The usual tricks he used to win people over fell flat with Emma. It drove him crazy. For the first time in years, Cameron found himself wanting something more than business deals and financial triumphs. He wanted her to notice him, to see past the image he had worked so hard to build. But Emma remained unmoved, completely indifferent to his wealth, his position, and his influence. To Cameron, it was both maddening and intoxicating. She wasn't like the others, and that made her something worth chasing, something he didn't understand but desperately wanted to. This marked the beginning of a complicated relationship that neither of them had expected. For Cameron, it was the first time he realized that he didn't know how to manipulate someone who wasn't interested in his power, and it frustrated him more than he cared to admit. Over the following weeks, Cameron found himself obsessing over Emma, a feeling he had never experienced before. Every glance she gave him, every brief interaction, seemed to linger in his mind. He had always been a man who got what he wanted, whether it was a business deal, a luxury item, or the attention of others. But Emma was different. Her indifference was maddening, almost as if she didn't care about the empire he had built or the power he wielded. At first, Cameron had told himself it was a game, a challenge. He was used to people falling at his feet, his wealth and status making him the center of attention wherever he went. But Emma's complete lack of interest in his wealth didn't make sense to him. She wasn't cold or rude. She was professional, calm, and composed. She didn't see him as a walking bank account, and that infuriated him. He tried everything: luxurious gifts, expensive dinners, exclusive events. But she turned him down every time. He offered her an all-expenses-paid vacation to a private island. She politely declined, saying she preferred a simple weekend getaway. He had her favorite flowers sent to the office, only to watch her leave them untouched on her desk. He even made it a point to compliment her on her work ethic, something he never did for anyone else. But she wasn't looking for compliments. She didn't want anything from him. The frustration began to gnaw at him. He was Cameron Blake, the man who had everything. People admired him, feared him, and loved him for his wealth. Yet Emma didn't even seem to care. It made him feel small, and the more he tried to get her attention, the more it became clear he had no control over her. And that was something he couldn't accept. Emma, on the other hand, remained a mystery to him. Her dedication to her work was evident, but it wasn't just her professional demeanor that caught his eye. It was the way she held herself, unfazed, unbothered by his attempts to impress her. She had a quiet strength that Cameron couldn't understand. He was used to being the one with power, the one calling the shots. But Emma didn't seem to want any of that. She wasn't intimidated by him, nor did she show any interest in the lifestyle he lived. One day, during a particularly tense meeting, Cameron made a bold move. He casually mentioned how much he admired her loyalty and dedication to her work, then added, "You know, Emma, you're worth more than all this." Emma looked at him, her expression unreadable, then simply replied, "I don't work for you, Cameron. I work for the company." Her words hit him harder than he expected. For the first time, he felt as if she had seen through him, as if she wasn't impressed by his authority or his wealth. That was when he realized she wasn't interested in him because of who he was or what he could offer. She was only interested in the job itself. He had nothing more to give her. It wasn't the wealth, the power, or the connections that mattered to her. It was her own integrity, her own values. This realization should have been liberating, but it only deepened Cameron's emotional conflict. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. He had no way of winning her over, and that felt like a failure to him. His ego couldn't handle it. Every attempt he made to gain her approval felt like a humiliation. And yet, despite all his frustration, Cameron found himself drawn to her. Her composure, her strength, the way she remained calm in the face of his games, it all stirred something inside of him. Something he couldn't ignore anymore. As the days passed, the tension between them continued to build. Cameron's frustration only grew, but so did his fascination with Emma. The more she resisted him, the more he wanted to understand her, and that's when things began to shift. He wasn't just chasing her anymore. He was starting to question himself, his own motivations, and the life he had built. Cameron had always been the master of manipulation, but Emma was an enigma he couldn't crack. And it was slowly dawning on him that, for the first time, he didn't know how to fix things. This wasn't about money, gifts, or power. It was about something deeper, a connection he wasn't sure he even understood. It was late one evening when Cameron's frustration reached its boiling point. The company had just secured a massive deal, and Cameron, surrounded by the usual group of yes-men and eager investors, decided to celebrate. Champagne flowed freely, and the energy in the room was electric. Yet amidst the laughter and clinking glasses, there was a feeling of emptiness inside Cameron, a sensation he had been fighting to ignore for weeks. He looked around the room, his eyes falling on Emma, standing in the corner, focused on her phone. He hadn't seen her smile all night. She was the only person not indulging in the celebration, and something about her quiet composure grated on him. He had tried everything, the gifts, the dinners, the small acts of kindness, but none of it had worked. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or status, and it drove him crazy. For the first time in his life, Cameron Blake didn't know what to do. In a moment of drunken arrogance, Cameron walked over to her. His steps were slow, deliberate, as the buzz from the alcohol clouded his judgment. He stood in front of her, his voice thick with the weight of liquor and ego. "Emma," he said, his tone bordering on command. "Kiss me like you mean it." The room went silent. Every eye in the room turned to watch. His words hung in the air, heavy and charged, as if he expected her to fall at his feet. But Emma didn't flinch. She didn't look shocked, nor did she shrink back. Instead, she raised her eyes to meet his, her expression calm but piercing. She had seen the mask of arrogance he wore, but tonight it was stripped away, revealing the raw insecurity beneath. "Mr. Blake," she said, her voice steady but filled with an unshakable calm. "I feel sorry for you." The words cut through him like a knife. His breath caught in his throat, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. The room was still, the silence deafening. His mind raced as her words echoed in his head. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he had never allowed himself to feel. This wasn't a rejection. This was something deeper. She wasn't just rejecting him, she was pitying him. He stumbled backward, the weight of her gaze crushing him. His entire world, the one he had built on power, control, and wealth, suddenly seemed meaningless. The realization hit him like a freight train. All his efforts, all his grand gestures, were nothing more than attempts to fill a void he didn't know how to address. He had built his empire on the belief that he could buy anything: love, respect, admiration. But with Emma nothing worked. She didn't need his wealth or status. She needed something real, something he couldn't offer her in the state he was in. Cameron's chest tightened, and for a moment he thought he might collapse. His arrogance had built walls around him, walls that now felt fragile and hollow. Emma had seen through it all. She had seen the broken man beneath the mask of the CEO. As the room buzzed with whispers, Cameron took a step back. The celebration felt like a distant memory, as if it had happened to someone else. He didn't feel like the powerful CEO anymore. He felt like a man who had lost everything: his control, his pride, and most painfully, his ability to connect with the one person who had challenged him the most. And that's when it hit him. The confrontation with Emma wasn't just about rejection. It was about him finally seeing himself for what he truly was, a man desperate for something real, but too proud to acknowledge his own flaws. The next few days were a blur. Cameron couldn't shake the image of Emma's face, the calmness in her eyes, the quiet strength in her voice. Her words echoed in his mind, over and over again. "I feel sorry for you." They replayed like a broken record, haunting him with every thought. What was she seeing that he couldn't? What had she revealed about him that he was too blind to see? He tried to bury the feeling, tried to push it aside by focusing on work, on the deals, the numbers, the empire he had built. But the harder he tried, the heavier the weight of Emma's words became. No matter how many meetings he attended, how many emails he sent, how many accolades he received, Cameron felt a gnawing emptiness that he couldn't escape. The loneliness that he had ignored for so long had finally surfaced, and there was no way to outrun it. That night, Cameron sat alone in his penthouse, staring out over the city. The view was breathtaking, the lights twinkling like diamonds below him, but he couldn't enjoy it. He had everything money could buy, and yet he felt nothing. The silence of the room was suffocating. He had always told himself that he was content. He had convinced himself that his wealth, his power, his control over everything was all he needed to be happy. But now, in the stillness, he saw how wrong he had been. For the first time in years, Cameron allowed himself to confront the truth. He wasn't happy. He hadn't been for a long time. His relationships were empty, his achievements hollow. He had built his empire on the belief that success and material wealth would fill the void inside him, but it hadn't. It never would. The loneliness that plagued him wasn't something he could fix with a new car, a bigger house, or another business deal. It was something deeper, a need for human connection that he had buried under his pride and arrogance. Cameron thought about Emma. She had seen him for who he really was, a man drowning in his own emptiness. She hadn't been impressed by his wealth or his position. She had seen through all of that, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't seen in years, the possibility of something real. She didn't need his money or his power. She needed him to be someone worth caring about, and that was the hardest pill for him to swallow. He walked over to the desk, his hand shaking slightly as he picked up a pen. For the first time in his life, Cameron didn't want to be the man he had always been. He didn't want to be the ruthless CEO, the man who used people and discarded them when they were no longer useful. He wanted to change. He needed to change. The thought terrified him. Change meant admitting that he had been wrong, that the way he had lived his life wasn't sustainable, wasn't fulfilling. But in that moment, staring at the skyline, Cameron knew that if he didn't change, he would lose everything. His sense of self, his future, and perhaps even Emma. He couldn't keep living the way he had. The truth was, he didn't want to be the man who people feared or admired from a distance. He wanted to be the man who people trusted, the man who cared for others not because of what they could give him, but because of who they were. For the first time in his life, Cameron understood that power wasn't about control. It was about vulnerability, about being real with the people around you. It was in that moment, as the city buzzed quietly beneath him, that Cameron made a decision. He wasn't going to let his pride or fear hold him back any longer. He was going to change, not for Emma, not for anyone else, but for himself. He didn't know where this journey would lead, or what the future held, but for the first time, he was ready to face it with open eyes, ready to discover the kind of man he was meant to be. Cameron's emotional fallout had stripped him of the walls he had built around his heart, and in that moment he finally saw the truth. Change was the only way forward. In the days following his moment of clarity, Cameron began to make changes, small at first but significant. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and he was finally seeing the world around him through different eyes. The walls of pride and arrogance that had defined him for so long started to crumble. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. Change rarely was. But he was determined to shed the skin of the man he had been. The first change Cameron made was simple, yet profound. He began to treat his staff with genuine respect. For years, he had looked down on them, viewing them as tools to serve his needs. But now he made an effort to learn their names, to ask about their families, and to acknowledge their hard work. He started leaving handwritten notes on their desks, thanking them for their dedication. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time in his life, Cameron wasn't using people as means to an end. He was treating them as equals. Emma noticed the shift almost immediately. At first it was subtle, a few polite gestures, a simple thank you here and there. But as the days passed, Cameron's transformation became more apparent. He was no longer the aloof, cold CEO who dictated orders from behind his desk. He was engaging, present, and genuinely interested in the lives of the people around him. It wasn't just his staff who noticed. Cameron's interactions with Emma, too, began to change. He wasn't trying to win her over with expensive gifts or gestures anymore. Instead, he found himself making small, sincere efforts to connect with her. He would leave her little notes, not of flattery but of gratitude. "Thank you for your hard work," one would read. "I appreciate your professionalism," said another. He didn't expect anything in return, and for the first time he wasn't disappointed when she simply smiled in response. It wasn't the accolades or praise he had once craved. It was the simple act of being kind. Emma, too, began to notice the changes. At first she remained cautious. She had seen his arrogance, his manipulation, and it was hard to forget. But as the days turned into weeks, she saw a side of Cameron that few had ever witnessed. His facade of control and power was crumbling. replaced by someone more authentic, someone who was no longer driven solely by ambition and ego. Cameron had stopped trying to impress her, and in doing so, she began to see the man beneath the wealth and the title. One afternoon, Emma was walking out of her office when Cameron approached her, holding a coffee cup in his hand. She noticed the way he smiled, not the forced grin he had always worn, but a genuine smile, free of any hidden agenda. "Hey, Emma," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I just wanted to say I appreciate everything you've done for me and the company. You've always been more than just an assistant." Emma paused, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you, Cameron," she replied, her tone guarded but warm. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with such authenticity. She had grown used to the superficial flattery, the fake compliments. But this was different. For the first time, Emma saw the man she had always believed Cameron could be, not the one he had shown the world. Over the following weeks, their relationship continued to evolve. There was no grand romantic gesture, no sweeping declarations of love, just small moments of understanding and respect. Cameron didn't bombard her with gifts or demands. He simply took the time to listen to her, to hear her thoughts and opinions. He found himself drawn to her strength, her honesty, and her unwavering sense of integrity. He respected her not just for her work ethic, but for the way she carried herself, the way she stood firm in her values without compromise. And Emma, for the first time, began to see the real Cameron. She had spent so much time judging him based on his wealth and power, but now she saw the vulnerability beneath his hardened exterior. He wasn't perfect, and neither was she, but he was trying, and that effort meant more to her than any extravagant gift. One afternoon, after a particularly busy week, Cameron asked Emma to join him for a quiet dinner outside the office. They sat under the soft glow of the restaurant's lights, and as they talked, something shifted. The tension that had once defined their interactions melted away. They weren't just the CEO and the assistant anymore. They were two people, getting to know each other, sharing parts of their lives that went beyond business. Cameron listened intently as Emma spoke about her dreams, her past, and her hopes for the future. For the first time in years, Cameron found himself listening, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to know her. That night, as they said goodnight, Cameron realized something. He didn't need to manipulate Emma. He didn't need to control her. He just needed to be himself, someone who was learning to be better, to be humble, to be present. And that, he thought, was enough. 6 months had passed since the night that had changed everything. Cameron Blake was no longer the man he once was, but something more, a man who had learned to face his own vulnerabilities, a man who had learned to be real. It wasn't easy, and it hadn't been a smooth journey, but every small step forward had led him here. The journey of self-discovery had been painful, but it was the only one that had felt worthwhile. For the first time in his life, he felt whole, not because of his wealth or his business empire, but because he had found a way to connect with others, and most importantly, with himself. The past few months had been a testament to his growth. He had apologized to those he had wronged, started meaningful relationships, and most importantly, worked to build something real with Emma. Their relationship had transformed, from a professional dynamic to one of mutual respect and understanding. Cameron had stopped trying to impress her with his wealth, and instead he had focused on being honest, humble, and present. He had spent the past month showing Emma a side of him that no one had ever seen, the side that was vulnerable, human, and capable of love. The more time they spent together, the more Cameron realized how much Emma had changed his life. She wasn't just an assistant. She was the person who had taught him to see the world differently, who had shown him that real love wasn't something to be bought or controlled, but something that grew slowly and steadily over time. She had become his mirror, reflecting the man he was and the man he wanted to become. On the day of the grand gesture, Cameron found himself standing in the garden of his mansion, the place where it had all begun. It was a quiet, serene evening, just as it had been that night months ago when he had first started to change. The air was crisp, the sky painted in soft hues of pink and orange, and the garden around him was lush, alive with the sounds of nature. He had come to this spot many times since, but today it held a special significance. It was where he had realized how empty his life had been, and it was where he had vowed to become a better man. Emma had arrived early that evening, as she always did, and Cameron had asked her to meet him in the garden. She was curious, but there was no expectation, no grand build-up. Over the past months, they had developed a comfortable rhythm. There was no need for pretenses between them anymore. When Emma arrived, Cameron was waiting near the fountain, looking out at the water. He turned when he heard her footsteps and smiled. It wasn't the confident smile he once used to mask his insecurities. It was a genuine, soft smile, a smile of someone who had found peace within himself. "Cameron," Emma said, her voice soft but warm. "You wanted to meet me here?" He nodded, stepping closer to her. "I know we've been through a lot, Emma," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I've made a lot of mistakes. But one thing I know for sure is that meeting you, getting to know you, has been the best thing to ever happen to me." Emma raised an eyebrow, slightly taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. She had seen a lot of changes in Cameron, but this felt different. This wasn't the man who had once tried to buy her affection. This was the man who had come to understand what truly mattered. "I used to think that success was about controlling everything," Cameron continued, his voice carrying a weight that was hard to ignore. "I thought that I could buy anything I wanted, that power and wealth would fill the emptiness inside of me. But I was wrong. What I've learned is that love, trust, and respect, that's what fills the emptiness. And you, Emma, you've shown me that. You've helped me see that being real, being vulnerable, is what truly matters." Emma's heart fluttered in her chest. She had never heard him speak like this before. Cameron Blake, the man who had once ruled with an iron fist, was standing before her, not as a CEO, not as a powerful businessman, but as a man who had finally embraced his humanity. It was raw, it was real, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever witnessed. "I don't know if I deserve someone like you," Cameron said, his voice cracking slightly, "but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life showing you that I can be the man you deserve. Not the man I was before, but the man I've become. Someone who knows that true love isn't about what I can give, but about who I am and what I'm willing to give of myself." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. He opened it, revealing a delicate ring. No diamonds, no extravagant designs, just a simple band that spoke volumes about his transformation. It wasn't about grandeur. It wasn't about making up for all the things he had done wrong. It was a symbol of his growth, of his commitment to change, and to the woman who had shown him what really mattered. "Emma," he said, looking her in the eyes, "I don't need to give you anything more than my heart, my truth and my commitment. Will you marry me? Will you spend the rest of your life with me, not because of what I can give you, but because of who I am?" Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she looked at him. She had never expected this, never imagined the man who had once been so arrogant and distant would stand before her, vulnerable and open. And yet here he was, offering her everything he had, his heart, his growth, his love. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Cameron, I'll marry you." In that moment, as Cameron slipped the ring onto her finger, the weight of all their past struggles lifted. This wasn't just a proposal, it was the beginning of something new. It was the culmination of Cameron's emotional journey, the proof that he had truly changed. And for Emma, it was a promise that the man she had come to love wasn't the man he had been, but the man he had become. Love is more than a feeling. It's a journey of growth, learning, and transformation. Cameron's story reminds us that we can change, no matter where we start. True love isn't about perfection. It's about embracing vulnerability, showing up with our true selves, and committing to become better for the ones we care about. Just like Cameron, we all have the power to evolve, to heal, and to build deeper connections based on respect and authenticity. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Join us for more heartwarming stories about love, growth, and the incredible power of change. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to start again and become the person you were always meant to be. Thanks for watching, and we can't wait to bring you more stories of transformation.